Yeah, so let's prepare this here quickly. So we're going to talk about SCSS and CSS today a little bit. So what I noticed, right, is that there's a little bit of an issue with the, how should I say this? So either you're kind of like a beginner and then you kind of like, right, you learn CSS normally together with HTML, and then you jump into something like Bootstrap as a next step and then try to take it from there. So one of the issues with that approach is actually quite literally that there is a majority of the web pages out there is based on Bootstrap. And even though with the new version it became a little bit more customizable and there's more things that you can do to make your website not look like 90% of the other sites, it's still kind of like the reality of things, right? Now, if you then, kick it up a notch, you will find that there are a lot of alternatives to Bootstrap. There are countless design systems or CSS only solutions that you could potentially use. Now, and then eventually you end up with discovering something like Tailwind, which is kind of like almost like it's a utility only CSS framework, right? This is how they call themselves. But the approach to something like that from the get-go, so as a beginner, actually is kind of hard for completely different reasons that are non-styling related whatsoever. It's that you kind of need to understand how Webpack works and how to precompile and all of those kind of things. So what I settled for in this little thing here is kind of like a in between, right? Where we say, okay, we're going to work with something that gives us the freedom of actual custom development while providing enough out of the box and getting rid of our compiling problems, so we don't have to worry about it. Now, the solution to that is something called the Gaudiamus starter, which is should be in your whatever platform you're using, should be somewhere in the descriptions. And if not, so this is where you want to go. Just Google Gaudiamus CSS, and you will get to the starter. Now, Gaudiamus itself, so the main repository calls itself a framework builder, right? And what that means, we're going to look like in a second. And this starter is kind of like, okay, this is a shell where you can easily kind of like create your own styles. Now, what we're going to do today is basically explore how that looks like and kind of take it from there. And so what I mean by that is we are going to check out this repository, and what you have two options to do that. So if you go to that repository, you will find that you can click on template, which basically generates your own repo. You can fork, or of course you can directly clone it. In the installation README itself, it just says clone, but feel free to do that however you think it makes most sense to you. I would probably just click on the template and then check out your own repository. Then you run npm install. Then first of all, of course, you have to clone it, right? So get that down with a git clone command, and then run npm install or yarn if you use it, and then run the npm start or yarn start to get it started. So I already prepared that. So what you should see is down here it then says open localhost 5000. Okay, so I did that already. And let me just quickly wait just one little second here. Go to the dashboard here and see what we have from the channels directly. Okay, just want to make sure that I'm not missing any chats or whatever. So by the way, so I'm streaming with Restream to multiple things like Twitch and YouTube and you name it. So the best way to kind of like directly communicate live is by using the Discord that you see on top of there. Okay, so that said, let's kind of like get this thing kicked off. So first thing that we're going to do is to switch over to a little bit more of a developer view here and have a look at what we have here, right? So if you open this, then you should basically see this, and that's another explanation of what's happening here. And for us, the most interesting things here are, of course, okay, what's happening in the index SCSS and the myvar CSS and the compositions SCSS. So the whole project is something that I will basically ignore, and I only look at this very folder here. Now, let's quickly walk through this and see if that makes sense to us. So this simply includes other files, right? So first it includes my vars. So that's something we're going to look at. Then from node modules, it includes the Gaudiamus SCSS. So this is something, this is the actual package, right? The Gaudiamus package. And then after that, the compositions are included, right? So we should keep that in mind. So first we're defining variables, then we're importing the actual package, and then we, well, let's look at what compositions are. Let's maybe start with my vars to get a better grasp of what's happening here. Right, so here you see a list of all the exposed variables that would influence how the framework works. Right, so let's go back over here and go to our playground. So I pasted some HTML already in there, so we'll walk through that later. But, or you know what, let's maybe start from scratch. Let's start from scratch and say, okay, we're going to create a simple container. And in this container, we're going to write a class. Now, the first thing, hello world. The first thing that I want to do is to basically create another color here, right? So I'm going to say text accent. Okay. So now I get this kind of like, so I'm colorblind, you help me out, mint output here. So what this does is basically to say, okay, apparently, how do you know that this class exists, right? This is probably a question that you might have. And so let's look at quickly how those things are generated. If I here go to the section colors, I can basically see that there's a primary color, there's an accent color, success color, warning color, gray, white, black. And then I have a color class map, and then I have a color map. So what do those things do? So I can combine basically anything from here with anything from here, and it will generate the right kind of color for me as a class. Okay, so if I, for example, say text, that would influence the CSS property color, and then I combine it with accent, and that would give me this kind of color, right? So text, accent, and now basically I have this kind of output. Now that means, right, that when I now update this, how the accent color basically looks like. So let's see, I want to give this a little bit more of a oranges touch. Like, let's make it ugly, why not? Just so we see it. So normally you would now have like some kind of watcher or whatever, and none of that is something that we need to worry about. So this is completely static. If I really want to compile this, I click here on this little update button on top. And what will happen is it's going to re-render. And here you can see all of a sudden I have this accent color. And since this whole shell is built with the same CSS, you can see how that basically influences everything. And that's basically a little bit the first thing of what I can do to kind of adapt it to my needs. But that's, of course, relatively primitive, right? Excuse me. So what we want to do is a little bit something else. We want to, let's dismiss this quickly. We want to kind of see how we can influence how the framework works in general. So maybe we're going to start just top to bottom to explore this a little bit, right? So here, as you can see, there's a grid system. Now, the grid system, I can define how many columns it has and how many items I can maximum have in one, well, row, so to speak, right? And my breakpoint map would define at which breakpoints the grid would basically would listen to. So if I created something else, actually, let me see this quickly. Sorry, this might be an important message here. Okay. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Okay, so and you can see this also here. Do you see this? What says this is a breakpoint test, and it says grid 12, and then MD grid 6, and then LG 3333. So it works a little bit like you would expect it to work, right? So in a 12 grid system, basically grid 12 means, okay, it's the full width, the horizontal width of the screen. And we're going to go mobile first, right? So this would basically mean on the smallest resolution, okay? So if we have an MD of 768, so what we need is to make this window small enough to fall below that. And what happens then is that, okay, now this applies, right? The grid 12. So all of a sudden you have, this is a full-fledged container. The next thing we're going to do is grid 6, 6. So 6 is being half of 12, meaning 50%, right? So 6 would then automatically resolve to 50% of the screen real estate. So now I basically say, okay, I can get 2 containers in one row. And then at the LG breakpoint, it's going to be a fourth, a fourth, a fourth, a fourth, or in other words, 3, 3, 3, 3. And if I'm big enough, you see that's exactly what's happening. Okay, so now how those are generated and how those are called is something I can influence, of course, right? So if I were to say, and this is going to break a lot of things, but let's just do this. I'm going to call this row. I'm going to call this row and refresh it. So now you can see that the way this is set up will not work anymore. But what I can do now is to say, okay, in this, let's create 2 P's. 1 and 2. Oops. Oh, can't type apparently. Okay. And now call this row 6, 6. What you see, right, now it basically conforms to how it behaves. And what you also see is, other than in Flexbox-based solutions, I don't do any of that on the column, right? I do this on the parent, meaning that the parent decides how whatever I'm using is going to behave. And of course, I can mix and match. I mean, there's no reason I can't do stuff like this. But the advantage is that normally in modern web, this will be dynamic, right? So if I'm iterating over something where I say like, well, in React or whatever, like so and so many cards of users or addresses or whatever I'm iterating over, I just want to define how that looks like when it does that. I don't want to, you know, make it complicated and have that executed on the level of the actual element, right? The parent decides as a container how the elements are supposed to behave. Now I'm going to change this back just so we have an easier access here. And I want to re-render this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the composition, right? And say, hey, listen, there is something, and this is probably, I mean, you have to make sure that that makes sense to you, right? So, but I'm going to say, hey, my P's, they do extend particular behavior. For example, do they have a border of 1? And that border is rounded. And that border has my primary color, just primary in that case. And it has a margin of 2 and padding of 2. Yeah, I guess that'll do. Okay. Now, if I apply that, then what will happen is, okay, now my P's are basically automatically put into those boxes. Again, be careful. This is not really recommended to do this on something like P, but just for us being able to better view this. So what I can now do is to basically influence the way certain things are happening, right? Now, what do I mean by this? So one of the most common problems that you have is that if you use a flexbox system, that what normally would happen is that the second column over here would not automatically go down to the level of the first one. You've probably seen this a lot, where you kind of have to fix the issue that you know, one renders differently and then is higher, and then all of a sudden you have this issue of them not having the same height, and it's kind of annoying because, you know, you worked on the flex horizontal level rather than the vertical level, and then things become a little bit complicated. Now with grid, this is not really how it works, right? So I can basically, with any of those, and let me create some space here so we can work with this better. Right, a little bit hard to see. I hope that works out for you guys. We can do stuff like this and say, okay, place y, so on the y-axis, start. And as you can see, now it basically goes to the top. Why? Because within the container here, it will go to the top because it's placed at the start of y, so of this the y-axis, right, of the vertical axis. And of course, if I were to say something like, no, please center it, it will behave like this. Or if I would say end, then it will behave like this. And how this is called is, of course, again, something that if you go back to the my vars, you can influence how those things are called by certain values that I don't really want to get into right now. But do you see how that, like those keys where you say like, okay, this is raised and rounded and so on? How's that called? That's something that I can basically influence. Now, that said, let's figure out a way to kind of like predefine a couple of things. So as you can see from a strategy perspective, right, I can basically expand all of those maps accordingly. And you've seen me use now a couple of those things that I have not explained. But basically, by setting all of those variables, I just generate combinations of things. So for example, I have a property map and a shorthand map, right? So given those two things, I can basically generate this. And then I say, okay, so what is the spacing unit is REM, the spacing step is 0.25, and the number of spacing units, so how often, you know, it gets generated, is 5. So I can go up to 5 with whatever, and it's going to be 5 times spacing step spacing unit, right? So if you look back into my composition, what I've done here with an M2 is to basically say, okay, this has an M, right? For, actually, let's maybe put this over here. M for margin, right? No shorthand map, so this, nothing else here, and then just 2, so the unit. So that would be basically be, so I'm within the range of 5, so it will work. And then I say spacing step 0.25, so 2 would then be 0.5, right? Twice this, plus REM, so 0.5 REM, and that's exactly the margin that we have. So of course, as you can see, I could also basically say, well, you know, top, bottom, right, left, X, or Y, right? So if I, for example, were to say, no, actually my margin is on the X-axis is 2, then we would not really see it that much. Actually, let me do it like this, then it's a little bit better to understand. then, you know, we render this, do you see how there's now no more margin on the left and right, right? Because the margin is only applied at top and bottom. See that? Ironically, this changes how this works too, because I used P. Right? So I can basically construct any kind of logic based on utilities and combine them accordingly. And that's actually pretty powerful if I want to have some kind of a standardized behavior. So that also means, like, let's just assume I would do this the other way around and said, like, actually my spacing step is 0.5 and my spacing unit is EM. What kind of consequences would that have? Let's figure it out. Right? And now you can see, like, okay, things become way bigger to the extent that this will not really work. Because of course now whenever, you know, it encounters something like you know, padding top 2, it basically is now a complete, so twice half is of course 1, and now we would have 1 EM, and that is quite a sizing difference, right? So let's revert that and basically look at what else we can do. So if I were to write something that is out of range, right? So let's just say here, or actually let's do this in our composition. I would basically say something like, this has a padding of 6. Now, this would not work, right? Because there is no 6. I could, however, basically say, well, I want this to exist, right? And then, of course, I generate all the classes with all the combinations up until 6, not up until 5. Now, the reason why you want to be a little bit conscious about that is, so if you're using a solution like this, what you would normally do in a live project is then purge the CSS and basically like get rid of all the CSS rules that do not apply anywhere on your web page. Okay, and this is something that we're kind of like going to do in the next step. For now, it makes more sense to kind of say, okay, let's not do that and be a little bit conscious of what this actually generates. And that's probably going to be the next big question. Like, so what does this stuff do? Now, this is running compressed. So the easiest way to basically figure this out is to jump into a completely different way of thinking and say, let's create something like this as on our own, right? So, I mean, there would be so much more to be said about, you know, what you can do here with, so there's a lighten and darken map and so on, right? So I could, of course, do stuff like, well, where's my here place? Here I want to have something like text primary dark. I could use an opacity of 50 on that, right? Which I wouldn't recommend for text again, but this doesn't matter. And since it's P, this is not going to be overwritten. See that? Interesting. Let's do that with BG. Right, and then I would have this kind of effect. So I can have a state map, right? So basically I can say, okay, so there's things like, well, what if that only happened on hover, right? So now it doesn't happen, see that? And then, but if I hover it, it happens, right? So all of those things that can basically combine to create a variety of different colors. And of course, all of those, so I'm just defining that, right, as I need, right? Okay, so what are the different opacity values that are possible? What are different states that are possible? You know, what are the different properties that are possible? You know, all those kind of things. Here you can see that, okay, here it's the width, a unit map, so P and percentage. And then, you know, those are the different things that I can do, right? So, of course, I can give this something like, maybe instead of all of this, let's say, okay, I want to have a width of 50%. Oops, not 5. I don't know how that happened. And then you can see then all of a sudden I only have a width of 50%. I could do this with pixel. That wouldn't work, right? No, pixel, how do I match this? How do I match this? This does not make sense, right? I have to look into that myself. How that would apply. Can I do this? Really? No. I've got, oh no, P is, oh, I don't have it. That's why. I don't have it. I see. The map is not, okay, sure. So here I say P is percent. Let's just generate it. And then I say pixel is pixel. Right? Let's do it like this. Okay. And now, oops, now I broke it. Now I broke it. Why did I break it? Oh, right, because, sorry, I forgot about this one. Start this thing again. I actually broke it. Okay. And now if I do px, yeah, then all of a sudden, right, going back here, I can now basically have width in pixel if I wanted to. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. So far, so good. Now, from the perspective of what's happening under the hood, right? This is basically the, so I mean, there's enough to play around, I guess, to kind of like, you know, generate this in the way you want. Let me maybe explain what you do when you're done, right? So what happens is this gets compiled into a file called mycss, right? So this is how this would currently look like. And as you can see, the whole grid system is there and just generates basically everything that we kind of like want to have, right? When I'm done with this, I can take this file, and by the way, I can simply click the download CSS too, and then basically place it into the project I'm working on after I'm done with you know, the customizations. And you know, for most things, you probably want to kind of build out your own solution, and then the only thing you do in the end is to change, you know, colors and spacing values and so on, maybe a couple of compositions. But what I want to get to right now is something like, okay, how can we actually extend some, like, what does stuff like that do under the hood, right? This is basically something that we can, of course, look at in the source code. I mean, Gaudiamus is open source, but let's start with something that is relatively primitive. So I want to basically say, hey, let's imagine, right, that we have a sum map, right? And our sum map consists of, let's see what we would want to do. We basically want to say this has simple values. Of, we're going to do opacity. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. So let me prepare this quickly. So we want to have, forget this again. Actually, forget all of this, I guess. Yeah, let's clean house here. And basically create a div. And what we want to have in here is we simply want this to have a class of BG black. And a padding of 4. Okay. Now the question is if I have a section here, and that has a class of BG white, of padding 2, and text black I don't need, that should be default, right? Okay. And then maybe learn how to type. Materials content. Okay. So what I can do, of course, is I can, and this is already out of the box, right? I could basically give this a 50% opacity here. But that would only apply to the background itself, right? So that's an alpha value. So it's an RGBA color that I made out of white. rather than giving the actual element an opacity, right? That's something that Gaudiamus doesn't do out of the box. So let's build that. And basically what we're going to say is, okay, so we're going to have an opacity map that is going to say half, and that's going to be 50, right? And actually I don't need this. And then I'm going to have full or quarter. Name is really weird. And it's going to be 25. Okay? So what I would normally do, right, is I would basically write those and say, okay, so if I set opacity half, right, what I want to do is I want to give this an opacity, right, of 50. Sorry, 0.5. This is how it works. Yeah, of 0.5. This is, yeah, I'm thinking this wrong. This is how it looks like, okay? And then same for the quarter and so on. And then, of course, like whenever I make changes, I need to change it everywhere, right? So if I say, hey, there's a new one, or now we want to work differently. So what I want to do is I want to auto-generate it just from this map, okay? So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use the capacity of SCSS and Scss to kind of generate that for me, okay? So what does that mean? I'm going to create an each, right? And I'm going to say, I don't really need this. I'm going to say for each name value in opacity map, right? And okay, so what do I want to do there? I want to generate a class, right? So I want to do dot opacity, dash. Now at this point, we want to use the variable of name, right? So it's supposed to be called half, right? Let's maybe get rid of this, then it's easier, right? So the way I'm doing this is I say, okay, let's use a hashtag and brackets and curlies, and then say name. Okay, so this should generate the name. And then now I'm back to my, okay, so what's the rule here? Well, the opacity is value, right? So let's give this a shot. So here, opacity half. Oops. Let's try this out. So we need to do this, and I should probably also write opacity correctly. Yeah, and now you can see that the whole thing basically has an opacity of 0.5, and if I now set quarter, then it's only 25, right? So 0.25, and this is basically how this works, right? So Gaudiamus is just a starting point of letting you know how those kind of things work, and then they would do stuff like that. What we're gonna do in the next time and say like, okay, so what if that's a mixin, right? And you can create mixins and functions. It's basically stuff that you can reuse to make your code. But you know what? I just decided let's not overdo it. So now if I basically say, okay, I want to have something else too. I would just want to have a hint, and that is, for example, going to be 0.1. Right? Then now let's generate this. Right? And probably actually what we should do here in this case is I want to have the text primary in this case, right? Just so we see this better. So if I now basically said, no, it's not quarter, it's hint, then you can see it's almost not visible anymore, right? I'm almost getting to the point where I cannot see it anymore. Okay, so I think that's kind of yeah, a good point to let you jump into it yourself. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them over. And again, so once you're done, you simply click on download CSS, and then the generated CSS is something that you can use in whatever project you want, right? That's kind of like the whole idea of it. Okay, so that said, I guess let me switch that over. So what I'm going to try to do, right? This is a little bit of a different story, but what I'm going to try to do is to mix and match a little bit of content that is also a little bit more suited for beginners. Because what I noticed in the YouTube videos is that I get a lot of feedback where I kind of noticed that it seems to be hard to follow a little bit more abstract, or let's just say, no, no, let's let's own up to it. I have to junk my content in a more bite-sized manner, so that people can actually follow. And this is something that I'm yeah, also interested in doing. So, but all of this relies on your feedback, right? So whatever you decide. So if you basically give me feedback on, hey, this is going too slow, or this is not the right kind of format or whatever, please don't shy away from providing that kind of feedback. So you probably noticed that there's no commercial interest in this. Like my channel doesn't use monetization on any platform. So this is honestly just a little bit of fun time for me. And for maybe eventually, no, actually, no, I have no, I have no ambitions when it comes to making money with this. This is more a little bit of a giving back to the developer community. So I'm not going to rule out that I might have a hey, sponsor me on Patreon link one day, but as of now, nope. You are definitely welcome to give me feedback on what kind of content you expect and want, and you can recommend things to look into. I do code reviews, so as long as you're comfortable with the whole world being able to rip apart your code, you can do that too. The only thing that you need to do in order to basically get that kind of stuff started is join the Discord server, and then I'll be happy to consider your work for a review. Thanks so much for watching, and I see you guys soon.